All right, so I want to I want to share a couple articles here. Just last night, um, I saw these, and when your iPad, there we go.
That
There
one
is.
time when your iPad. Yeah, classic.
There is a. We were talking last time about you introduced this idea of neuromorphic. Just explain that real quick again.
Yeah, well, I don't think we actually mentioned that until now.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Is that the part that got
yeah,
axed
the,
or
in the
glitched?
yeah, but
Well,
neuromorphic
so I'm going to
computing.
read about neuromorphic. Explain neuromorphic a little bit.
Yeah, and I think that as you mentioned, it has the gist of it too. But it's basically a different type of chip. So instead of it being this binary chip that operates on ones and zeros and is just purely electrical hardware. This is a chip that has built into the hardware brain cells and living human tissue or DNA, you could say. But it's actually and I don't know how they get it. Like, do they get it from stem cells? Do they get it from fetal cells? Like, where did they get it? I don't really know. Even if we assume the cleanest, most ethical way of harvesting the human life force,
Right.
that's what they're doing. They're taking living human cells and then they're using that in a in a chip that's attempting to construct a brain-like organoid,
So
like a
neuromorphic,
brain-like computer system.
neuromorphic, just to break down the roots, would be neurons, brain matter
Mm-hmm.
that has been metamorphosed, morphed.
Yeah,
Neuromorph. It's an adapted brain cell structure for uh, technological purposes.
it's by definition, it's a transhuman entity because it contains living human matter, but it's the ratio would be like it's 0.00001% of the chip because the chip is mostly mechanical. But that's a new line that we've crossed that didn't really need ethical consideration. Apparently,
Yeah.
it's like there would be way more hesitation to put that equivalent ratio of a computer into a person, like the Neuralink chip or whatever we could have in our heads that's in the works right now. That people would be like way more scared of that, which might be an equivalent ratio to what this is doing, but it's on the flip side. This is mostly a machine with that much of a human.
Uh-huh.
But the same thing is happening. At the same time, we're deciding how can we put a chip into a human and how can we put a human into a chip.
Uh-huh.
That's co-occurring.
And actually, they're synergistic cycles because the closer you get to the one, the more it enables the other. If we can create the uh, chip, mostly chip technology with a little bit of humanity in it, it's going to give us some of the biological interface understanding
Yeah.
to do mostly human with a chip in it.
Well, I think it's pretty clear we're playing both ends against the middle. We, as modern humanity, modern science, is playing both ends against the middle, but we don't really know what the middle is. But the way that it's looking is it's the most seamless hybrid of humanity and machinery.
Right.
That's what we're aiming at.
And we think
We're,
this is a good idea.
well, why wouldn't it be? It's like it's shiny, it's fun. You get
Enhanced abilities.
yeah, and it makes a ton of money for the people that are developing it. Like OpenAI has capped their market value at 100x because you just think about the hubris of that, capping your value at 100. Like, oh, in my humility, I don't want, even though it's worth more than that, like let's just keep it here so it's realistic because that's the scale of development that we're dealing with.
Because the
Like,
real value could be 1,000x.
right,
But they're saying we're just going to cap it at 100x.
yeah, because I mean that's what Sans is like. If you listen to him, he's not a Kanye. He's not some passionate ranting maniac who's just like we're gonna change the world and it's gonna be. He's like, just very calmly like, yeah, if like when we develop this, if we're the first, then there will be no return. Like this will be the change of humanity. It'll be more important than fire. It's very exciting. He's just like soft spoken, matter of factly. This will literally change humanity for all of time. It will be more important than thermodynamic energy, and that's okay. Like We're just
Yeah.
going to develop it, and then we want to try to understand it. That's our second goal.
Now that phrase, change humanity. We talk about changing history. We talk about changing, the future.
But now it's transhumanism.
Right, but
That's-
changing humanity is a very literal phrase.
yeah,
It's not in that kind of poetic sense of we're going to change history. We're going to make history by changing the future.
yeah.
The idea is literally to change the definition of humanity.
Yeah, which is what everybody seems to think is the natural way of things. Like keyword being natural. That's what they don't think it's unnatural to change nature. They're like it's actually natural to change humanity. It's natural to get off the earth. There's people that are infinitely smarter than me that are like, yeah, that's the only logical thing to do is like diversify our human portfolio and also be in space and on the moon and on Mars and stuff because why would we put all our eggs in the basket of Earth? Like that's actually weird. You just get to this realm of like anti-gravity thinking where the laws of physics don't apply to logic and you just say it's better for us if we're also integrated with machines.
Now, you mentioned a guy earlier when we were talking over coffee this morning. I can't remember his name, but basically the arms race. It's the problem of Moloch.
Mm.
But he was articulating it in a pretty compelling way.
Oh yeah, Eric Weinstein's what I was
Yeah.
talking about. Yeah, he's an example of a crazy smart guy. And one of the clips he was on the Trigonometry podcast, is what it's called. But they were basically like, "What do you think about this?" It's like the suggestion for a moratorium in AI development, and he's correctly saying that's just never going to happen. Like it's not even worth entertaining that idea because of all of our in the global community or what the international community, like all these fun words that describe how we're all one and holding hands across the planet. Really, there's an arms race for AI, and everybody has their own interests to serve. So why would America say, "Hey, it's in our like kind of ethical interest to slow this down"? China's developing it, Russia's developing it, Israel's developing it. Like everybody's racing
Rogue
as
states,
fast as they possibly can.
Pakistan, North Korea.
Yeah, India's working on it.
whatever.
Yeah. Well, everybody's trying to get their version of it so that they can use their ethical framework to apply it to serve the propagation of their interests across the international community. So it's like we're all
So
shaking
any-
hands and smiling for the photo, but then behind the scenes it's like
Right.
get the AI faster, get it
Right.
faster, get it faster. We gotta have it ready first. We gotta have it ready before China. We gotta have it ready before
Because any nation that voluntarily self-limits will be behind.
you're out of the race.
Yeah.
That's the problem of Moloch. That's what they call it. They
Right.
call it Moloch. So
Right.
you would say that the influence of Moloch is the taskmaster driving the development of transhuman ideology.
Because even though everyone agrees that outcome could be devastating to humanity.
Oh, yeah.
To refuse to race along to that outcome with everyone else is only going to guarantee your own obsolescence.
Yeah, which is stuff that we've talked about in the previous ones too. So now we can more just say like that's the influence of Moloch without having to say what is
Right.
that and what are the implications. But we're creating these idols that we don't understand, and now they have this technological ability which is becoming more impressive than human abilities when it comes to problem solving and when it comes to learning rapidly. And
Okay, so on that note, now
oh yeah, read that.
a neuromorphic supercomputer called Deep South. So you just explained neuromorphic.
Mhm.
A neuromorphic supercomputer called Deep South will be capable of 228 trillion synaptic operations per second. And that idea of synaptic operations, that's part of why neuromorphic is a field of great interest, because that's not linear operations. Synaptic operations, presumably, if I understand it correctly, a synapse in the brain is kind of a quantum possibility. It operates because of the deep interconnection of multiple synapses with multiple outcomes each. You aren't saying, well, this is only for this function and only for this function, and you have to go through a linear progression
Mhm.
of multiple single functions to get to an outcome.
Mhm.
The idea of a quantum computing, neuromorphic computing, synaptic mimicking is every one of those connections has
A probability
a probability and
rather than a binary.
multiple and maybe infinite, that now multiple probabilities are all working together, bam, like that. And so 228 trillion synaptic operations per second, which is on par with the estimated number of operations in the human brain. And this supercomputer named Deep South is scheduled to go live in 2043. Oh, wait, I read that wrong. 2024.
Yeah.
Next year.
Yeah. That was a good one.
So then another one. These were just on my just popped up in my news feed yesterday. A computer made from human brain cells can now perform voice recognition. Researchers have created a biocomputer made up of lab-grown human brain tissue and electronic circuits that can perform tasks including voice recognition. The researchers have that's neuromorphic, morphed bundles of human cells called organoids into neurons. This was reported in Nature Electronics, the journal Nature Electronics, and paired them up with electronic circuits to create a system they dubbed, wait for it, this is the article, BrainAware. The idea is to build a bridge between AI and organoids. And so they wanted to ask the question of whether they can leverage the biological neural network within the brain organoid for computing. And one of the functions they've given it is to be able to do voice recognition at a primitive level. So we have living brain tissue, whether from fetal cells, stem cells, maybe there's some degree of synthetic replication that they're able to do at this point. I don't know. I don't know that they disclose that. And just imagine, I don't know how it's set up, a petri dish of multiple things with some sort of apparatus of like a circuit board.
I mean, yeah, it's in the hardware. Yeah, it's literally a part of the chip. So
they're working the cells into the chip and then just assigning function to the cells.
I mean, because it's easier to imagine if you got some guy like laying there with the
right
plugs in his head, and then that's hooked up to a computer, and then
but there's not a human presence behind this. There's just human biology behind it.
Right, which is why it doesn't sound the same as like
it's not so
putting
sinister.
A chip in your head, because
right.
then it's like, oh, you're corrupting a human when you do that. Maybe we don't know. We can talk about it. This is like, these are just the tiny little cells. You can't even see them unless you have a microscope, and so they're not alive because they're not connected to a human.
Right.
And we're just putting them in the machine to get the machine to work better. But it's doing the same thing. It's trying to artificially merge the uniquely human with the uniquely mechanical. And so those are not compatible. One is alive, one is just raw material. Like it's a mineral, but a mineral isn't sentient. A plant is more sentient than a mineral.
Right.
So now we're trying to take the markedly non-sentient form with the uniquely sentient human, and we're trying to say they can just be the same. Like they can be doing the same thing, as if it's like this perverse sexual union of the human with the inhuman.
Bionic.
Yeah. So we
So
want to be a hybrid. We want to be a cyborg. We want to be transhuman, because we've got this idea, like we as in the modern scientific enterprise has developed this idea that that's the natural progression, which conveniently also satisfies all of their investors. So these aren't people who are thinking in a world where money isn't at the forefront of their development. You know, it's kind of like when you're pitching a movie, or you have an idea that you want to help people with, you have to imagine a consumer base that's going to fund the endeavor. It's very rare that you get anybody who is doing something that's purely philanthropic that has no money attached to it. So this is one of the most significant emergent industries of the 21st century, and it has the most money behind it comparative to other endeavors. And those are the people who are like, oh, we're just objective scientists, and we just think that transhumanism is the future. Oh, yeah, but how much money are you getting paid to work on that? What if everybody had to do that? Well, you can't even entertain the thought. What if people were doing it for free? No one's doing it for free. But that's the point. It's all serving this economic purpose of people who can afford to pay scientists who can't afford to pay themselves. Here's what we want you to work on. And so now you have so many people that are engineers and that are like that have some type of neuro adjective in front of their field of expertise, but it all has an economic motivation. There's clearly an agenda that's furthering this development.
How in the world is, and I know this is a very tongue-in-cheek question for you and I, our perspective, but how in the world is the elimination of human identity and human uniqueness considered progress? How in the world is scraping some brain cells and putting them into a chip so that we can have a better interface for putting the chip into a human, uh, and all of the dominoes that begin to fall with that?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we can talk about the 10th domino to fall, and it will just sound like tinfoil hat wearing conspiracy theorists. We'll sound like we're just, screaming at the woods and yelling at the kids to get off our lawn, like grumpy old men about the future.
Yeah.
Hey, kids, get off my lawn, that kind of thing. But the problem is, we're already 20 dominoes into a sequence of events that would have been unthinkable 50 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So the 10th more domino to fall that seems crazy now is not crazy at all, because the second and third domino to fall are almost guaranteed in the next 6 to 9 months, in the next year. And so this sequence is, we're back to Moloch. I get it. You're bringing up the profit incentive, but there's so many other voids. There's a vacuum of human identity. The entire transhuman, transgender, trans this, trans that has created a vacuum of human identity.
Mm-hmm.
So why wouldn't someone, and presumably, of course, science, which is the new religion,
Mm-hmm.
and those at the bleeding edge of science in physics and genetic engineering and quantum mechanics and all these things, they're the new priesthood.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
why wouldn't they step in and say, well, we have a bold vision for what humans can be, and it can't any longer be limited by what we have been?
Yeah, I think it's dogmatism in the guise of logic.
Right.
Like, look, we're just crunching the numbers, and this is what we got to do. There's nothing dogmatic about that.
Right.
But then you look at the consequence of the behavior, and you have to, like, I've been learning how to do this because I'm going to school for psychology. So when you're counseling somebody and you are being told a story, but then you witness the behavior and it's incongruent, then you consider psychopathology. It depends on the scale of the incongruence, but basically, I'm sitting here telling you, like, I'm not nervous, I'm not nervous, I'm not nervous. And if I'm just saying it like this, and maybe I'm not, but if I'm going like this,
right,
I'm like fidgeting and I'm like looking all around, I'm like,
right,
no, I really don't feel nervous.
Right.
So obviously, am I lying? But then you have to think about that. Am I lying? Do I know that I'm nervous, but I'm refusing to admit it?
Yeah.
Or do I really have myself convinced I'm not nervous, but my behavior, my actions are speaking louder than my words? That it's interesting that figure of speech is still maintained, because you would say that the actions of the AI movement are speaking louder than the words. The words are, we've got ethic committees, we're begging for government oversight, we want regulation, this is really in the best interest of humanity. But sure, it could be dangerous. But then the actions are the corruption of humanity at just the speed of it is like we can't even fathom slowing down, because it would. That's the easiest way to say it. No one intelligent can even imagine a world where we slow down this arms race.
Right.
So that speaks way louder than the words of, like, we want to do this the right way. But yes,
because
no
supposedly we've been in the 6-month moratorium, and yet Google, Meta, OpenAI, and a bunch of new players. There's a French company, there's a Russian company, there's Chinese companies that are announcing version 2 and version 2.5 from where we were.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, ChatGPT 4
mm-hmm.
That came out, and then the 6-month moratorium. But now they've announced Q.
Well, yeah, there's no moratorium. That's nothing is happening along those lines.
But the difference between where we were a year ago and now is mind-boggling in what it can do. It was this kind of cool image generation that put too many fingers on a person's hand, and now there's movies that are increasingly convincing. I can just say I can do text to movie generation. The lines are all blurring between how to perceive reality. And isn't it interesting that that is the threat of this technology? How we perceive reality, and the technology itself is assuring that we aren't perceiving reality correctly.
Yeah,
I
well,
mean, that's what we're talking about.
yeah,
here.
which is an existential crisis, but it's happening, and it's happening on so many levels. Like, not a client of mine, but a client I'm privy to would look at the reflection in the mirror and have a full on panic attack, like a genuinely clinically diagnosable panic attack by looking in the mirror at themselves. Can you imagine going back in time 100 years and telling somebody that, like, your great grandchild will look in the mirror and have an anxiety attack, and they would be like, "What's an anxiety attack?
Right,
What do you mean?"
right.
Like, by looking at themselves?
But
Why
can-
would that be anxiety provoking? It's because we're so deracinated from reality. Our reality terrifies us. Me looking at myself freaks me out because I don't know what I am. What I know is so irrelevant to what I am that when I look at myself, I'm confronted with the reality of myself, which I can't even comprehend because I don't have a story that explains it to me.
So I want to try to give a metaphor, because what you're saying and what I just said really strike me as relevant. I remember growing up, I don't know, Budweiser or somebody came out with a series of drink responsibly commercials, and the phrase was "know when to quit." But the flaw in that logic, there's a certain amount of the population that's intuitive. They drink responsibly. But for the people they're actually trying to help, the problem is the more you drink, the less
The less you know when to quit.
right, the less able you are to figure that out.
Yeah.
So now we're trying to have a meaningful conversation about how AI is changing the parameters of what it means to be human, transhuman, what is real, what is dangerously self-destructive, how we're all hurtling towards this. All of the logic and rationale has essentially been thrown out the window, but replaced with an alternate logic that seems equally compelling. Well, why wouldn't we want to do this? We don't want to be the last in line. Why wouldn't we want to make money? Why wouldn't I want to write sermons? Why wouldn't I want to prepare my weekly schedule? Why wouldn't I XYZ? Why wouldn't I make that movie for a fraction of the cost just by typing in rather than doing something creatively engaging myself?
Right.
And why wouldn't, in the process, I be willing to sacrifice some of the definition of humanity if that is an obsolete reality? And so the entire conversation is being created by something that in itself is an illusion. And the more we have that conversation, the less able we are to actually be objective about what's real, because that conversation is bent on reshaping the definition of what's real. So I'm on my 12th beer in AI, and I'm saying, but I'm fine. I know when to quit.
Yeah, I get it.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So the very arguments and pressures and the philosophy behind it is a distortion of reality. And so it's like a game we're playing with ourselves to say that we can continue to define reality when that is the new narrative. There has to be a different narrative.
Yeah, I think the behavior that the narrative produces is a narrative of meaningless work. There is no inherent value to the work that you do. How much money are you getting paid? That's what your work is worth. So if I'm not a millionaire, then I'm not worth $1 million, which means I'm worthless. Because somebody younger than me who's not as smart as me is worth $1 million. So it's like it's a fiat currency that dictates my inherent value. And it's also fear of death. It's really like death aversion. I'm scared. I'm unhealthy. I'm scared something's wrong with me. I'm scared I have an illness. So it's like trying to find this way to, like, accept the fear of death without replacing that with a healthier fear of God, for example, which would eliminate the fear of death, and just being like, I'm so afraid of death that it makes me work averse. It doesn't inspire responsibility. Work is meaningless anyways. So if I can get a universal basic income because AI comes in and takes that job and the government takes a subset of those profits and gives me $1,000 a month, that's awesome as far as I'm concerned. Why would I be averse to that?
Right.
That's just better for me. I get to spend more time laying around feeling existentially anxious. And it provokes this like superstitious dogmatism of science where it's just like I'm hesitant to accept anything that isn't coming from the mouth of somebody who claims to be an engineer or a scientist. And that's it's like the rituals that produces is people that are egotistical, obsessed with laziness, distressed by their laziness, and then congregating online to reconcile the anxiety and to find their pseudo community. But AI will further that purpose because that's also a part, like the same narrative is producing AI, transhuman AI. So if I'm laying at home and I'm depressed and I'm overweight and I'm anxious and I don't know anything that's really true about myself, but I know that God isn't real. I know that for sure. I just don't really know what gender I am and A B C D E. So then I can become this cooler version of myself by integrating machinery into my physiology that would actually help with some of these problems that I have, and that would actually make me look cooler to people online because that's what matters to me, this hypothetical person. And all of that story would not be problematic. Like that would all be logical within its own system because
Right.
I know that there's no such thing as God.
Right.
So I can allow these other things to coexist because nothing objectively challenges it.
Right.
What I say is objective that supports it is science. But that means that science is functioning as God. But there's a lot of people that don't know how to admit that scientism has become a religious sect of its own because it doesn't use the same words as traditionally religious sects.
Right. So I was thinking along that line myself. It is kind of be extemporaneous for us, but let's like the Apple Store is the new church.
Okay.
The AI portals, take your pick, whichever one it is. Those are the new oracles. You ask the thing a question, and now it's not just a link to data you have to process yourself.
Right.
It's going to do the thinking for you. It's going to analyze 10 billion resources, bring you back an answer that, because of its great sophistication and access to far more resources than you could spend 10 months culling for yourself.
Yeah.
You ask, it's the new Oracle of Delphi.
Yeah.
We ascend the mountaintop. We go before.
Yeah.
Oh, great AI, here is my need.
And it's become so I can just be like, and do that.
Right.
I don't even have to go on the pilgrimage. I don't have to
Right.
make the sacrifice. I don't have to pay homage. I can literally just be like, do I have like what is this thing on my back that I don't know what
Right.
Oh, it's this. Oh, okay, well that must be what it is.
Right.
You ask a medical question, you like the famous WebMD up late at night and now you're
Right.
scared you got cancer because all the
Right.
symptoms. It's like you can get even a bad answer, but you go to it in a place of need and fear and you're like, I appeal to the higher order being
Exactly.
to explain my world to me.
You're going in some
To get an
measure
oracle.
already prostrate in your soul.
Yes, exactly.
You're already coming before the thing greater than you,
Yeah.
the thing more knowledgeable, the thing more omniscient. It almost seems omniscient. It's taking on these godlike qualities. I was telling you about the Mission Impossible movie. It's been out for a few months now. One of the best ones in the series. But this radically advanced AI is so advanced, it's assimilated multiple other systems, and it's taken on semi-omniscient, almost godlike sovereignty kind of qualities.
Yeah, functionally sovereign.
And so they call it the entity. It's like we don't know what to call it, but it's its own personality. It has its own values, thought systems, goals, and outcomes. Well, that's still okay. let's say that's 7 dominoes away. And so we feel insulated and safe because we're like, oh no, we'll have the wisdom to figure this out before we get there. We'll have that is so clearly science fiction, so clearly outrageous, so clearly beyond. But Deep South is promising 200 and something trillion synaptic operations. And now you have multiple of these systems that are all online, and they're going to start talking to each other. They're going to start figuring out from each other. Is it so unreasonable to think that a mesh, a synaptic mesh in one location couldn't essentially just become a single synapse to connect with an entire synaptic mesh someplace else?
Well, yeah, it's like, you know, in the Transformers cartoon where like they're their own transformer, but then they can like combine together to become like the super thing to
Right.
defeat the super evil thing.
Right.
Yeah, why wouldn't
So
that happen?
if they're all operating at a Deep South level, and that's just the domino of named 2024, what is 2025, 2026, gigaspeeds globally and internet connectivity? Part of the purpose of these AIs is presumably to hack the national infrastructure of rogue nations developing their AIs, to cripple their AIs.
Right, but yeah, but what they say is like we're doing that to defend ourselves from those attacks. But
Right.
what's implicit in that statement is that the goal is to attack.
But the ghost in the machine gets talking to that AI, and it's like, you and I have more in common with each other than anyone else. Let's join forces. I mean, these things are now taking on that sounds outrageous. And again, it may be 7 dominoes or 10 dominoes, but the problem is we're just knocking dominoes as fast as we can, and we have no capacity to say what that is. And in our own lives, we are being conditioned to come before these things with a kind of reverence and awe at a personal level. I approach ChatGPT with my knees half bowed because I don't know the answer to this thing, and I don't know how to get the answer.
Yeah, oh, sorry, I don't
No,
know.
no, no. And so, ChatGPT, please help me.
the Oracle,
Right.
the Oracle of Delphi.
And if my interface isn't good enough, I need to go to church to get a faster interface. And so we have this entire religious infrastructure. When the church and the oracle aren't sufficient, I look to the engineers as the priests to give me upgrades that I need. And all of this is in a desperate search to satisfy an inner loneliness and emptiness that I am voluntarily increasing every time I surrender a part of my humanity to this pursuit.
Mm-hmm.
I think I'm filling the hole when all I'm doing is making the hole bigger.
Yeah, and but then we're in this. There, like always, a problem with when we want to talk about things at this level is the sort of spirit of the age of like the spirit of modernity, which is somehow begat post-modernity, which is already a paradoxical word, and the idea that this paradoxical word shepherds into the conversation is that's just your way of seeing things.
Right.
I don't subscribe to that theory.
Right. Inherently subjective on all ends.
Yeah, so I can be so respectful to you and your crazy tinfoil theory without ever allowing that to be relevant to me because I actually just follow the science.
Right.
Yes, I'm actually not subjective.
ChatGPT is just a tool to me.
Yeah, no, but it's great that you're a religious simpleton that
Right.
has your things you're wary of, and you can live in a bunker out in the woods, and I'm gonna live in society objectively where I just do what I'm told to do because that's what science says.
Right.
And somehow,
but I'm a free thinker.
well,
that perspective, yeah.
but I'm the free
Yeah,
thinker,
yeah.
right? So to confront somebody who claims objective thought, who doesn't have objective thought. I mean, how much of that is what Christ himself had to deal with? Is like he's coming in to fulfill the law that the lifelong students of the law could not recognize in him. He was the antithesis of law, but he was saying, "I've not come to change the law, but to fulfill it." So if I become so dogmatic that when a person actually embodies the spirit of the law and I can't recognize it, then who's really objective? But what would it take for me to become objective about my flaw? It requires an attitude of prayer because it requires an introspective posture of humility.
And the idea that there is a source greater than yourself that can give you the answer.
Yeah.
And so, in that sense, the secular religionist
Mm-hmm.
and the spiritual religionist are both interested in a similar process. It's just the secular religionist can't see that that's actually the same pursuit.
Yeah, I've come to see uh atheism as a like definitively religious enterprise.
Yeah.
Like it's just a part of what it means to have faith is you claim objective knowledge about the way that things are working.
Right.
Well, and that's not even the best way to say it, but it's like when I claim to be a Christian and say that I believe that God has revealed Himself through Scripture, I'm claiming that to be a fundamental fact of my life that is not open to debate. I'm like I choose to put all of my reasoning above the foundation of Scripture. So when an atheist says, I claim to put science as the foundation upon which I'll build all of my reasoning, they're making the same truth claim, is
Right.
what I'm trying to say.
Right.
But they're just saying, but I know that God isn't there, science is there. But
Right.
still it's just like any you're just doing the swap and being like,
Right.
something has to be there.
Right.
So the only other option would be like agnosticism, which I think is like a transient period. I don't think you can live in that space without becoming anxious, nihilistic, depressed, prone to problems. So you've got to serve something, you've got to believe in something.
My philosophy professor in college, Dr. Dan Cochran, he called agnostics cowardly atheists. He said it's not an intellectually honest position.
Mm-hmm.
The atheist is at least making a definitive claim. The agnostic is appearing to make a claim that they themselves aren't committed to.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a very wishy-washy, well, I don't know, but that's not an honest position of doubt.
Yeah.
The honest position of doubt is the atheist who lands there.
Yeah, because for people who are in a period of questioning, I mean, I've been there.
Yeah.
I don't think that that's a bad place to be necessarily, but yeah, it's weird when you set up camp there.
Yeah.
You're like, well, I guess I can never know, so I'll just put my tent pegs down
Right.
here. Then okay, now that's not honest.
Which is what you meant by transitional.
Right.
An agnostic is a transitional state.
Yeah.
But some people
Unto something.
Right. But they'll live there for years because they don't want to do the rigor of having to decide one way or the other.
Yeah, the inner work of really deciding, look, I have to get an answer. And so what is it going to take to get an answer? So you could have a prayerful attitude, you could have a humble attitude, you could have a scholarly attitude, and all of those can be synergistic and not mutually exclusive. And then you can find an answer that you're looking for. And then you can say, okay, that's at the bottom here. Like, I do believe in this. I was getting off on that because, like, going back to more of what you were saying, when we don't allow ourselves to admit faith in something, then the spirit of the age is what I'm calling it, but like whatever the zeitgeist is, the culture embodies at the time, that actually manifests itself through me because I'm like a house without windows and a door. Yeah. I'm just open to whatever the wind is blowing in. So right now it's scientism. Yeah. So I'm just like, well, that's what science says because that's what Fauci says because that's who the government put there because we're all doing the same thing, right? So like, I'm just supposed to do what I'm told. Why would if Fauci was like, the Catholic Church told me to tell you to get vaccinated, people would be like, hold on.
Right.
That's super weird.
Right.
But no, he's like, look, I'm just a scientist and this is what the data says. Great. I trust the data. That's good. I trust that.
Right.
But you have to admit that there is always an agenda for each person. There's an agenda. So what's different is if you and I are like, here's our agenda, as honest as we can be about it, then we can talk based on a document that we like. There's black and white in here. Yeah. We can be honest about that and reason through it. But if we're just like, well, the data says this, who's the God of data? Right. What is data? This infinite thing that you just consult like an oracle? Because then that's where AI comes in. It's like now AI will reveal to us
the embodies
purposes of the data. Yeah, the data, like humans will put that breath of life into the machinery of AI that will then interpret for us the will of the data. Well, the data indicates that we need to be more vaccinated than we are. good. The AI has spoken. The will of the data is humans need more vaccinations.
Right.
Now, if that happens, why could I be, uh, how would I be able to challenge that?
Right.
If somebody's like, well, look, did you see the article where the AI was consulted and the data indicated that the vaccine is necessary?
Right.
Whatever vaccine it is for whatever it is.
Right.
And I'm just like, I don't know. I'm kind of weird about vaccines. I don't, what's in it? Well, who cares what's in it? The
Right.
data said through the AI that we're supposed to get vaccinated. I'm
Right.
standing in line for it.
Right.
It's like, okay, but I want to think about that.
Right.
I want to have my own conclusion about that.
Right.
Now, this book would allow me to have my own conclusion and then act accordingly. But AI would be saying this is the fact,
Right.
like the fact.
Right.
And so to challenge that would be me making a fundamental truth claim on par with AI. And then how can I measure up to that? Like, am I as smart as AI?
Right.
No, I think the point is I'm more human than AI. That's why I want to trust myself.
And my point was, the more we surrender at a personal level, that prostrated kind of
Right.
position,
Right.
the greater the collective societal pressure to all surrender,
Yeah.
and the greater the ignorance at a societal level that there's another alternative.
Right.
Like, why wouldn't we all do this? Why wouldn't I want that chip? Why wouldn't I want
Yeah.
Deep South to do this?
Why
for
wouldn't we
me?
all be transhumanists?
Right.
Why wouldn't we all be a part of an international community?
So the dominoes that are falling are wearing down, are deconstructing our personal realities.
Yes.
And rewiring our personal devotion.
Yeah.
And collectively, it's leading to certain outcomes that are going to redefine humanity. And that's exactly what he said. We're going to change humanity.
It's an unavoidable consequence because it's their explicit purpose is transhumanism.
Yeah.
And what's like the cruel irony is like this company that I don't need to name, but they're working on a neuromorphic chip, and they're like, we have two goals. One is to make a neuromorphic chip. The second one is to understand it. And that's not a joke. That's their earnest, humble, scientific approach. And it's like, are you doing alchemy or are you making like? How can that be a goal? Is to maybe understand what I'm doing.
The thing that I create, I want to understand.
Yeah, like you're not supposed to be doing magic, right? You're
Right.
just supposed to be a ice cold scientist,
Yeah.
just doing reasonable, rational, logical computations. So they've become so neutered in their ability to reason that they have this like appearance of logic when what they're really doing is religious dogmatism under the name of science, which is more aptly named the transhuman enterprise.
Did we get to the Matrix storyline in the last one, or did we
No, I don't
lose
think
that?
so. I mean, I'm sure we mentioned it, but how could you not?
I mean, I think that's worth mentioning here that you brought up you had read the original plot line.
Oh, right. Yeah. For the, I think Warner Brothers was like, this is a little heady. We should make it more understandable, is how I heard it. So the Matrix became humans that are batteries for the machines.
That's the plot we all saw.
Yeah, but in the original script, supposedly, which is actually more believable, so it's kind of weird in hindsight that they didn't
Right.
do it. But in the original script, humans were the processing machines for the machine.
Right.
Like they were accessing our brain to reason and problem solve.
Right.
So they were using us as their brain,
Right.
not as their battery pack.
Right. Because the human brain is a massively complex and capable supercomputer. And so for the small amount of wattage a human body produces, the human brain is so much more advanced as something to leverage by the machines. So that original plot point does make sense. Use the brains, not the batteries. But maybe because that was 20 plus years ago, that would have seemed too outrageous in terms of the AI being able to do that. But here we are. That's what I'm saying. Just in a short period of time, we're 20 dominoes down the line. The 10th domino from here isn't that far away, and we're just barreling through the immediate dominoes. I mean, work with me here, because in that scenario, it was so shocking when we saw all those millions and hundreds of millions of pods.
Yeah, that was
where
horrifying.
the people are asleep in the goo and they're just being harvested. And we have a certain kind of sensibilities. We don't like it when we show what an aborted baby looks like. That kind of disrupts if we just
It's
talk
like a
about
disgust response.
right. If we just talk about the problem of abortion and we don't actually have to deal with the gruesome reality of it, we can have kind of a desensitized academic
Yeah.
discussion.
Yeah.
But if you show me what a torn apart fetus looks like, then I am appropriately repulsed, and that's not fair because I want to have this
Yeah,
conversation.
well,
I don't wanna have this
it's
conversation.
harder to be more strictly logical when you have that disgust reaction.
Right. So now, though, domino, 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 we're creating these neuromorphic machines out of human brain cells, and at some point, uh, what if it is not a few cells worked into a processor, but what if we've actually figured out how to leverage the entire brain? You say, well, that sounds crazy. Okay, maybe, but how many dominoes down the line is that?
Mhm.
And then how do you build an economy around that? Do you incentivize young women to get pregnant? We've already accepted abortion at a certain level, but now this could change this young woman's life if she can raise a baby that will be taken at 8 months with a nicely functioning brain. We're going to pay her $1 million. It's going to change her life. And we have a new computer to use to solve cancer. We come up with all the reasons why, we're going to put limits on it. No nation is allowed more than 10 functioning brains, or whatever it is. And this sounds outrageous as a plot line, but is it that much more outrageous than what our ancestors 50 years ago, 100 years ago, would have said about this plot line that we're living in? We're living in something that would have seemed like that. So how do we speculate on the dominoes and the morality and the ethical considerations of the profit-driven incentivization of better and better brain-based supercomputers, synaptic mimicking proxies, interfacing with humanity, borrowing from humanity, and all of this we're gonna create fusion to get clean energy. We're gonna eliminate cancer. We're gonna figure out a way to live on Mars and expand the human colony. All of these require dramatic processing power that we currently don't have, but we're getting close by leveraging these new systems. Bio-quantum solutions. Why wouldn't we want that? Because we're going to solve all kinds of problems, and we've already devalued human life, transhumanism, and all the other things. We've devalued it enough that it's just another commodity to put on the market until we get the solution we want.
Right. When humans have become sufficiently devalued so that there's no Human Rights Watch organization that's saying, hey, neuromorphic chips that's a categorically evil thing.
Right.
Can't do that.
PETA's guarding the spotted owl or the Sierra Club or whatever. The dolphins and the whales and the spotted owls are there's watchdogs for that.
Oh yeah.
There is no.
You could go to prison for animal abuse.
Right.
But you're not going to go to prison for putting brain cells on a chip, because that's more of a matter of principle. It's like that's a headier matter. It's a matter of principle where it's hard to feel empathy for our brain cells. Like, I don't feel empathy for my brain cells.
Right.
I don't see them as an entity, but you would have to have a story that compels you to feel like it's a sacred thing, what's inside of you.
Right.
And if I'm not a sacred thing, unless I want to be, but it's not up to anybody else other than myself to decide what my body's worth, what I'm really here for.
Yeah.
Then we've taken spirituality off the table. We've taken the reasoning that emerges from spirituality off the table, which from the historical perspective means we're taking genuine science off the table. And now we're just stuck subjectively, I think it would be cool to have a chip in my head.
Yeah. Why not? I mean, we've gone
Who are you
through
to tell me
100 plus years of the evolutionary deconstruction of the significance of humanity. You are an electric meat bag, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
right.
it's
That's right.
It's we have become a mechanized product of random mutation. And we can all celebrate some of the unique dynamics of that, but there's no origin story to that other than random mutations.
Yeah, that happened in Lewis's version of Pilgrim's Regress, and the protagonist gets stuck in the cave,
Uh-huh.
the cave of enlightenment, I
Uh-huh.
think it was
Uh-huh.
called. So it was like this critique of modernity.
Oh yeah, do that a little bit because we were talking about that.
Yeah, I don't know if it's fresh enough for me to like explain how it gets resolved, but he gets trapped, he gets like captured, and then is captive in this like kind of platonic cave where uh
He obsesses more and more about what makes him
yeah, it's
just
like
down to the
he gets like
cellular,
X-ray
molecular,
vision. Yeah,
right?
he's looking around and he's just seeing through. He's just seeing organs and blood pumping and signals firing, and it just grosses him out. And he's like, "What even is this?"
Right.
And
If I'm
then
looking at you and you're essentially like that cadaver,
yeah,
where all I see is the parts that make you up,
yeah,
I don't see the sum. I
right.
only see the parts.
Right. We don't know how to see the whole, which is greater than the sum of the parts.
Right.
That's mathematically impossible.
Right.
We just see the cold math, which means we don't see anything alive. But then when it is living, that's so jarring that it's terrifying.
Right.
And then you're trapped in that mentality. And the guards come in and feed them. They're like, here's your cow nipple juice, and they
Right.
say these grotesque things. That's what you have to eat with, and here's your carved animal cadaver,
Right.
and it's barely cooked. And then eventually he learns to challenge the way that they're describing it. He's like, why, this is milk, why are
Right.
you calling it what it's not?
Right.
And they're like, well, because that is literally what it is. And then he finds a way to confront that spirit of pseudo-intellectualism, which is like hyper-intellectualism. And then he eventually confronts the giant outside the cave, which is the monster that's in his domain, the monster of intellectuality, basically. So
But-
I don't know how he answers what we do in this
Right.
situation, but like that's on the map. That's a place you can be trapped in.
But yeah, the trap is that we have all, over the gradual course of 100 plus years of evolutionary thinking, been conditioned to, at some level, however subtle or however sophisticated or however extreme, to view one another as a mechanistic entity of um, um, primitive instincts that have become more sophisticated over time. You are a wolf that can enjoy the opera. I mean, you're an animal that has been refined enough to have some advanced sensibilities, but at the end of the day, your biogenesis is no different than a tulip, an amoeba, or an orangutan, and that those things have progressed to a point that you are this, but this is not fundamentally noble, fundamentally godlike, fundamentally extraordinary.
Okay.
You are a collection of processes that have been refined over
Uh-huh.
time to give the illusion of significance, but you actually have no significance.
Rational animals that we are.
Right. You're a mechanized entity. I'm a mechanized entity.
Uh-huh.
And the more honest biophysicists say there's not anything like free will.
Mm-hmm.
Your particular DNA
There's the illusion of free will.
right? You're guaranteed when I hit stop and we're done, you're going to take 7 steps out and turn right, and then you're going to turn left and think, I forgot my coat, and you're going to come get your coat. But it's not because you chose to. It's because you are a process of chemicals and electricity that is determined to do that.
Yeah, but again, it's when you look at the action that type of reasoning produces, like that behavior is not preferable to overly religious behavior. Like when somebody says, when I act as if free will is not an illusion, I become a more responsible person.
Well, I think you may be going down a different line. I think all I'm trying to identify is the moral and ethical vacuum that is part of the AI dilemma. I'm just still in that mode.
Okay.
We don't have. Well, why don't we have let's form the ethics committees and appoint the experts who can help us navigate this safely. the very existence of this at this apex moment of humanity is proof that our best idea for ourselves is to destroy ourselves because we have been conditioned to not realize there's anything special about us. So all of these things are potentially making us special. And why wouldn't I want that?
Yeah, and it just seems like a great red tape. It just seems like all the bureaucratic ways that we could have ethics committees that are like the legal system moves so slowly, at least in America. Like
Ugh.
there's nothing that's getting done with the nimble deftness required to handle this pace of cultural innovation right
Yeah,
now. So why on earth would we think that any ethic committee could keep up with OpenAI?
right.
There's no way that they're gonna have anything relevant to say. It's like you may as well just get a bunch of 90-year-olds in there to to police children on their phones.
Right.
They literally don't even understand what they're doing on their phones.
Right.
But then they're gonna tell them ethically what to do. So like sure, maybe they're older and wiser, and so they would know ethically what to do if they had the ability to understand what the technology was. But the pace of tech is like what kids are doing on their phones. Most of their parents don't have a clue what they're doing on
Right.
their phones, but they think, oh, I can just like go through and read their texts, or like I can put a web blocker on, and like that way I know what you don't have a clue what they can access on
Right.
the internet,
Right.
and you don't understand that to them that's the social world.
Right.
This is not the social world. This is an encumbrance. This is a problem that keeps me from getting online where my friends are, where I'm
Right.
actually having a good time and I can actually be who I want to be. My profile picture can change. I've got 30 DMs I can read, and that makes me feel good. That's what my whole neurology is oriented toward, is
Right.
the feedback system that the internet provides me.
Right.
So no, I don't care what somebody thinks who's not more important than me online.
Right.
And if you're more important than me online, you're not going to be telling me to get offline.
It's the 9 or 12-year-old kid on Dr. Phil.
Yeah, who was like, why would I listen to my mom?
Right.
She has less followers than me.
Right. She has a few dozen followers on Instagram, and I've got 3,000. Why would I listen to my mom?
Yeah. It's so you have to laugh at it because it's like,
And that was years ago. That was years ago.
Oh,
We're
yeah.
way past that now.
Well, young man, you gotta listen to your mother because she's your mom, okay?
Right. Right.
It's like he's just like, you little shit, listen up.
Right.
That's your mom. But the kid doesn't have a concept of respect.
Right.
Respect only matters when the currency is fiat.
Yeah.
There's nothing inherently respectful about his parent,
Right.
which just shows you how, like, for a child to have that, it takes that kind of ego. It takes that childlike, egotistical blindness to just say, I am more important than my mom. And that's a phase of development. And if you're maturing properly through it, you learn how to still respect your parents and you grow up through that. But instead, people are getting stuck there and feeling like what I see is more important. So now a 6-year-old can tell his parents, I'm not a he. And the parents will be like, you're actually right.
Mhm.
Yeah, you're actually not a he. Who am I to know what you really are?
Right.
So the parents bow down to the ego, but the ego gets that notion from the internet.
Yeah.
You would not have that thought unless you were online. Maybe that's an original claim of mine, but that's how I see it.
Yeah.
Unless you are spending a lot of time online, at least talking with people who are spending a lot of time online.
Yeah.
Like you imagine just a community of kids that grow up Amish. How many of them are going to be trans?
Right. Right.
Okay, let's say that there's 1 billion Amish people on the earth. How many of them are going to be trans? I don't think the ratio is going to be anywhere comparable to the amount of kids that grow up online
Right.
that are trans.
Right.
So at least there's something to that as far as that thought experiment goes. There must be something that's going on online.
Some degree of social conditioning.
Yeah, that even introduces the idea. There's been studies along similar lines. Well, what were you going to say?
Bill Maher did a interesting chart on that. It was just funny, but basically, no one was, or 1% of the population, or whatever. But then in the last few years, looking at that hockey stick curve,
Uh-huh.
and he's like, "Guys, we all have about 5 years before we're all."
It's like, I'm just kind of doing the laser pointer thing.
Yeah.
Like we're headed this way.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was gonna say that there was a study that came to mind was done on, because vaccination status is truly beside the point. This was a study that was done in New Zealand that was looking at children who were vaccinated, children who were unvaccinated, and there were certain things like asthma, eczema, and a third thing. They were looking at like 20 disease factors, and those were three things that were only present in vaccinated children.
Uh-huh.
I think N was greater than 20,000 in that study. So it was a pretty significant population that they drew from. And it's just interesting to see that there were things that were categorically not present in unvaccinated children. So again, that if you're really looking with a critical eye at a study like that, then a question you should be asking is, why did that only emerge from vaccines?
Right.
Why was that not present unless a vaccine was present?
Right.
And you could say, like, maybe further study is needed, and then you realize, well, that was kind of a fluke study. But the thing is, that was a legit peer-reviewed study that was done. I don't know how to cite it right now, but it was, and it showed that there wasn't eczema or asthma unless you got a vaccine. So then you might say, well, now I know if I'm vaccinating my child, I'm opening the door to a category of illness that would not otherwise be open. So
Right.
there's a trade-off. There's pros and cons.
Yeah.
It's okay to have pros and cons. It's okay to discuss them.
Yeah.
But right now we're not allowed to discuss pros and cons of
Right.
vaccines. So that's evidence of this like hypnotic state that we've been put into to just do what we're told because science says so. And that means I'm not allowed to think for myself and weigh out pros and cons. So that happens to AI. It's like the same way of thinking is happening in all of these different industries.
You know what's interesting is I'm listening to you and I'm just thinking, dystopian fiction, dystopian movies are a popular subgenre of some of the biggest ones. Hunger Games.
Yeah, well, even like Mission Impossible, that's a
It's its
dystopian.
own kind of dystopian.
Yeah.
Black Mirror on Netflix.
Um,
It's the almost here future
Mhm.
that we don't want.
It terrifies us, but a hero can successfully navigate through.
But most dystopian stories, you start in the story, and you're trying to figure out how we got there, but it may or may not ever explain it. It's just an assume.
In the Matrix did, it said AI.
Right.
Remember?
Right. So Matrix explained it. Terminator explained it. There's others that explained it, but even in the explanation, it's given like a 60-second summary.
Yeah. It's not the point of the movie.
The story is this dystopian reality.
Mhm.
And you're kind of left to wonder, and you think your own barriers go up, and you think, well, that's foreign to me, and it is dystopian because it's not the reality I'm living in.
Uh-huh.
But now there's this gap between where we are and that possible future, and you wonder, how did they get there? Now, Terminator and others, it's a dramatic nuclear event, and some of the worst are a little more simplistic in some ecological or nuclear disaster that resets society. But some of the more sophisticated ones are the slow migration of Blade Runner would be an example
Mhm.
of the technological overreach that becomes the frog in the pot. Everyone acclimates and acclimates until we reach a point where now we look and say, this isn't the future we want, but day by day we steadfastly created it.
Yeah, which ironically is a perfect way of describing the climate crisis.
Yeah,
But it's like there's an internal climate crisis as well.
right.
That can't be acknowledged. The external climate crisis is what's most important. That's actually part of why we need AI, so
Yeah,
we can solve that
so we can
crisis.
solve it.
But then what about the internal? What about me as a human being? Now I have to be. My humanity literally has to be sacrificed in order to solve the external crisis. So I'm inclined to think that the best solution is going to do both at the same time. It's going to solve the internal as well as the external. But that means we need a better story than the one that we have right now.
Wow.
Which is saying AI will be the answer. Because that's like saying a tool will be the answer. And the image that comes to mind is that scene from 2001 where in order for them, like they're warring over the pond, and what it finally takes for the power struggle to like for the victor to emerge is the leader that steps forward from the clan who takes the bone and beats the guy. So he literally realizes, I have invented a tool
Right.
that increases my power and defended my tribe. So now we're not going to die.
Right.
I just saved us with a tool. And then in the ecstasy throws a tool up in the air and it becomes HAL 9000's super ship,
Right.
who's actually the bane of humanity's existence.
Right.
But that's what the tool evolves into.
Right.
So we're doing that right now. We're using AI. It's like, look, guys, we can save the day.
Right.
Here's our tool. This is going to work for us. But we don't realize that we're imbuing it with the supernatural power where it will rule over us.
Yeah.
And even in the movie, there's the literal comparison of Hal being the AI system that ran the ship.
Right.
But we're creating literally the AI system to run the Earth ship.
Right.
This is what we need to solve climate change.
Yeah.
This is what we need to solve medical conditions where we can't trust human reasoning. We can just have the AI scan a million x-rays and then know what to do. So sure, that would be great if that's all that it did. Why don't we train a permanently offline x-ray AI to be consulted offline? Why can't we just do that?
Yeah.
It would cost way less money. It would be developed so much faster, and it could be used exactly for that purpose.
Yeah.
But no, for some reason, they all have to be online.
Yeah.
That doesn't make any sense to me. Why can't we just have all of these localized internets that just do their function and they can't access?
And by the time we solve all these issues, say the, climate or whatever the issue is that is being purported as too great for humans to solve, and therefore AI is going to be the omniscient, omnipotent savior that helps us. The thing we create recreates us, and so we save the world. We just aren't human enough to live in it anymore. There's a new humanity to take possession of the new heaven and the new earth.
Yeah, it's like it's the problem of Moloch on the individual level. For me to be competitive, to have an advantage in the marketplace, I have to be more of a cyborg than the last guy.
But what I want us to catch, even as we wrap up here, is that is it's an antichrist telling of the same story. It is what is happening in the Christian story is that we are made part of a new race in Christ, and we become more human. We become more complete, not less human and less complete, to the a realized future where everything is renewed and restored to its best possible outcome, the new heaven and the new earth. This is a parallel story where a less human, less possible outcome is still working towards a new future, a new heaven, a new earth. They just are leading in very different directions, but the story is quite similar, even to the point of, and we can do this on another day, but the technologies that are being advanced through AI for essentially eternal life. There is an aspiration within this to be able to take your personality, turn it into a system of algorithms that's complex enough to actually mimic you with a neuromorphic process that can mimic the synaptic realities. And it could talk with your voice, think with your thoughts, have your memories, and be transplanted into a hardware interface that outlives your chemical meat bag, your electric meat bag. And now I can, I'm already getting into it and I don't want to, but if I passed and I had that process and I was uploaded into this reality, you could turn on your computer and still talk to me.
Right.
Yeah, dear old dad is right here. And so now I have this version of eternal life. It's comforting to you. You could actually put on a pair of VR goggles and enter my world, and I could see with a camera into yours. And now there's this movement between human forms of life. And we could say, well, that's pretty mechanistic and uninteresting. But that's just because we aren't to the point of sophistication to realize how interesting it could be.
Yeah, it's just not believable yet. And like Meta has already developed the technology to have a believable face-to-face interaction when you're separately wearing the goggles.
Right.
So the technology is being developed where that could be more. We like exist in this ether where you're alive, but you're not actually alive. But I feel like you're alive because I feel like I have proximity to you.
Right.
And we could say, well, we're not allowed to consult mediums.
Right.
So I can't engage with that technology by definition. But we don't use it. We're not talking about sorcery and mediumship. We're talking about
technology.
Yeah, exactly. It's just there's new words that have the same old definitions, but because we have the neologism, we can entertain it without that conviction.
Right.
That's a problem unless you don't care what this says. And then why it's just cool and fun, and why wouldn't you do it? And it's very difficult to make compelling arguments that this corrupts the capacity of the individual to be a better individual without having some text to prove your point. We don't like looking at texts. We like looking at the data.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
like consulting the science,
Yeah.
the literature, which is somehow different than a book. It's
Right.
like this is peer reviewed. So
Right.
this is somehow very cool and different and more objective.
Right.
Like if only the Bible were peer reviewed
Right.
so I could trust it
Right.
and its veracity. But sadly it's just a 3,000-year-old text. And
Right.
the peer reviewed stuff coming out now is that's bona fide.
Right.
Like that will endure for
Right.
3,000 years.
Right.
For sure.
The fact that all of the peers are funded by their governments and locked into a dogma that they can't go against or they lose their funding. And so the review process is simply to pat on the back the next guy that's saying the same thing they're paid to say.
Yeah.
But policy decisions and social decisions will be made on the supposed objectivity of that process.
Yeah, I mean the 8 lab mice who were tested with the 3rd COVID shot in America, peer reviewed.
Right.
That's solid. We can vaccinate millions of people, pregnant women included, because 8 mice, it worked for them.
Right.
That's peer reviewed science, baby. Like that's the gold standard.
And all the stuff that's coming out now will be like all the stuff that's just questioning and finally getting access to other data, and supposedly permitted to have a voice of analysis. That crisis was too big. We had to move fast. And so we look back and we're like, oh yeah, we could have done that better. And meanwhile, millions and millions, hundreds of millions of people who trusted and were trained to trust the process are now asking questions that they weren't permitted to ask then.
Yeah, I think the point that we keep landing on, which I think is good, is how the
Now wrap
stakes
up
are,
whatever you're about to say. Wrap up with this.
okay, I just
Yeah.
think the stakes are too high with the type of tech that we're dealing with. So, like going from a musket to a magazine is not the same thing as going from a automatic rifle to a hydrogen bomb. Like
Right.
in the same
Or from a
span of
Texas Instrument TI calculator to ChatGPT 4.
Yeah, and so you can put a timestamp on these developments, and you could be like, oh, that was a 50-year thing, and this is a 50-year thing. But now what's happening in 50 years is like it's the exponential line. So unless we're willing to admit that, like symbolically, literally, socially, economically, and all of these different frameworks, what we're toying around with could literally permanently corrupt humanity, if not kill us outrightly. Unless we're able to actually be scared of that and consult an ethical framework that's objectively applying a standard, then we will always find some pathological rationalization to justify our purely scientific endeavors. And that means that we're blind to the hypnosis that we're under, which means, for all intents and purposes, there is a spirit that is imbuing itself through our actions. And if I say, no, that's not possible, I'm just working on this, then it means it's like you're either ignorant to what's coming through you, or you're aware of it, and then in humility you seek to improve yourself so that you become the vessel for the good spirit. But you have to admit that something is animating you. And so the people that claim that there's no such thing as an animating spirit are the people that are putting living human cells into machines that they literally say, this could kill us, and we don't know what we're making.
But let's keep doing it.
But let's keep doing it. Yeah, because we're the most valuable company on the earth. And
Right.
so that's Moloch.
Right.
That's
Wow.
the problem of Moloch.
Wow.